the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are underrated in terms of their versatility. By versatility, I mean the different kinds of stories you can tell with them. At face value, they're often portrayed as silly and lighthearted. There's certainly that dimension to them, but they're capable of more than that. The Ninja Turtles can do action, they can do comedy, they can do drama. They can be light and kid-friendly, but they can also be dark and violent. Heck, they can even do a musical.
Growing up in a glass bowl with chameleons, lizards, and tadpoles.
They can also do weird interspecies romance, if you're into that sort of thing. Or in the case of issues 13 through 20 of IDW Publishing's TMNT series, monster horror followed by sci-fi. Originally at this point in the video, I had written a line where I said, "Turtles in space," with a lot of echo on my voice. You know, like pigs in space from The Muppet Show. But it just occurred to me that there's a panel in issue 14 where Krang literally explains to Baxter Stockman that he's an interdimensional being, not an extraterrestrial. Apparently Krang and members of the Utrom race are very sensitive about being called aliens. So I'd like to take this opportunity to apologize to any Earth-dwelling Utroms I've previously offended by using the A-word. Totally insensitive of me, and it'll never happen again.
Intergalactic planetary!
This is a comic book transmission. When you open Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 13, it's evident a pretty big change has occurred. It's very much the same series, but it looks very different. Issue 12 was Dan Duncan's last as regular penciler. His were large shoes to fill, as he'd been with the series since its beginning. He'd introduced us to the IDW-verse's take on almost all the characters, not counting the ones introduced in the TMNT micro-series issues, more on those another time. Throw in that Duncan just happens to be one of the best to ever draw the Ninja Turtles, and virtually any artist to pick up the pencil in his wake would have a daunting task ahead of them. That responsibility ultimately fell on Andy Kuhn, who draws issues 13 through 16. His resume includes plenty of work for major publishers, including Fire Breather, an original series he created with Phil Hester for Image Comics. Kuhn is quite good when it comes to drawing mutant and otherworldly creatures. Just look at his renderings of Krang and the Utroms. His work on human characters like Shredder and Karai is also pretty strong. But the transition between Duncan's take on the Turtles and Kuhn's toothy, inky renderings of the boys in green is a jarring one. As such, his work on TMNT is an acquired taste, though ultimately a good one. Kuhn is at his best when he's working on Slash, a TMNT legacy character first introduced in the Archie comic books that later made his way into both the 1987 and 2012 cartoon shows. Slash is a big snapping turtle, who's typically portrayed as a misguided enemy for our heroes. In the IDW-verse, he's mutated to be a psionically controlled puppet for Baxter Stockman. But wouldn't you know it, he escapes. He winds up crossing paths with the Turtles in, of all places, the basement of an abandoned church. The church fight, as I call it, winds up being pretty awesome, as it initially takes place in the dark, with the only light source being flashlights. Kuhn is truly in his element here, as he turns the book into a horror show. Slash has never looked more menacing or terrifying than in some of these underlit shots. Colorist Rhonda Pattison's contributions to this sequence can't be understated. She creates a dim, hazy yellow glow that perfectly complements the inky blackness of Kuhn's shadows. Continuing on the theme from issues 1 through 12 of family in its many forms, issues 13 through 16 see the TMNT crew take an in-depth look at the different, and not always so good, paternal relationships on display in the series. We've got Casey Jones and his drunk, abusive father Arnold. We've got Shredder's strict, often harsh relationship with his granddaughter Karai. One can even make an argument for Baxter Stockman and Slash. But of course, the preeminent paternal dynamic in this book is between Splinter and the Turtles. Historically, Splinter in his many incarnations has had one prominent character trait. He's wise.
There is no monster more dangerous than a lack of compassion.
The way of invisibility also includes the way of silence.
Mastery comes not of the body, but of the mind.
As such, writers have always focused more on the turtles when it comes to character development. But these issues, 14 in particular, give Splinter an added and unexpected layer. When Casey Jones gets beaten up by his dad once again, resident hothead Raphael goes into a rage. He sets out to teach Arnold Jones a lesson, but is unknowingly followed by Splinter. After Raph has roughed Arnold up, Splinter arrives and shockingly puts a blade to Jones's throat. "Is this the solution you seek? Would you have me execute this man, my son? Would that make you happy?" Naturally, this brings Raph out of his angry fit. Splinter goes on to say that as a young man, he, like Raph, was prone to intense anger. Thus, father and son are able to relate to one another in a new way. We even see later on that Splinter's anger issues have not subsided completely. As the IDW team has done with so many other classic TMNT characters, this move doesn't change the essence of Splinter, but it adds a new layer to what was already there. It allows him to keep doling out wisdom and fatherly advice, while reminding us that Splinter is wise for a reason. He's fought many of the same battles as his sons, and faced many of the same demons. This move gives Splinter a certain credibility, as opposed to simply making him a fountain of platitudes. Let's also talk about Woody, a side character introduced early in the series who works at a pizza place. He gives the turtles their pizza fix via friendship with Michelangelo. Woody's introduction into the book was charming, but seemingly random. Even in a world as detail-rich as IDW's TMNT, did we really need to know where the turtles get their pizza from? Maybe not. But the book ultimately wound up better for it. In issue 15, shortly after one of Mikey's pizza runs, Woody gets attacked by Slash. Then, toward the end of issue 16, Woody abruptly breaks off the friendship. Juxtaposed with some dialogue from Splinter explaining the nature of Mikey's kindness and sensitivity, we get a heartbreaking few panels in which he finds a goodbye note from Woody, and then departs in tears. A heart-wrenching moment as the result of a character who seemingly meant very little at the start. That's the thing about Michelangelo in the IDW verse. He's not just a party dude. He's a sensitive guy. So once again we see the layering of a classic character. The reason Mikey's emotions often come off so big is because he feels them in a big way. We aren't altering or subtracting, we're simply adding. Heading into issue 17, Coon tags Ben Bates in on pencils and inks. The Ninja Turtles were right up his alley, as he's done plenty of work on Sonic the Hedgehog and Mega Man. Bates has a more traditional take on the Turtles, in that they're more in line with what someone like Kevin Eastman might turn in. There's a little bit of Jim Lawson in there too. Bates' turtles are a little bit shorter, with faces that are expressive and nicely proportioned. His work here actually made him into one of my favorite artists on the series. Issues 17 through 20 take us straight into sci-fi territory, as the turtles are accidentally transported to Dimension X and find themselves caught in a war between General Krang's forces and the resistance from the planet Neutrino. At the center of the conflict is the robot Fugitoid, the only being capable of building Krang's ultimate weapon, the Technodrome. For TMNT buffs, it's all very familiar. Fugitoid has been part of TMNT lore since the early days of the comic books, and has been adapted into various media. The Technodrome, meanwhile, was a staple of the 80s cartoon. It was essentially a poor man's Death Star, but it still managed to be pretty cool. I think it was the giant eyeball on top. It gives it personality. The IDW series repurposes the Technodrome as a giant terraforming device to forcefully change Earth's atmosphere to that of Krang's destroyed home planet, Ultramonon. I like that. It gives the Technodrome a more definitive purpose. And again, personality. It's interesting to me that the Neutrinos, who first appeared on the 80s show, made it into this series so quickly. In the cartoon, they were 3 high-pitched teenagers with crazy hair who drove flying cars and threw a lot of slang around. In the IDW verse, they're a lot more hardened and militant. They still have their crazy hair, though. Incidentally, the planet Neutrino is ruled by a king who I swear looks like he was plucked straight out of Super Mario Bros. 3. Same with the princess, to an extent. It's not bad, it's just a thing. Bates and Pattison work really well together. Like Kuhn, Bates does some really dark shadow work, but because of the sci-fi war setting, Pattison gets to use a wider array of colors. Ergo, it's got a little more grandeur to it, but this still looks authentically like a TMNT comic. This 4-issue Dimension X story is the first time Krang really takes center stage as the primary villain. There's a lot to like about IDW's more serious take on a character who, in the cartoon, was often played for laughs. So much of it has to do with how he's drawn. Kuhn and Bates both draw Utroms very well, and each go out of their way to make Krang himself look ruthless and sinister. In Bates' case, he's so detailed that you actually believe he could exist in the real world. Or at least a real world. That's not a small feat, as Krang is essentially just a pink blob with tentacles. His robot body, meanwhile, looks much more mechanical. Not to mention dark and foreboding. We're reminded that Krang is a warlord, and very much someone to be feared. By virtue of his plan to terraform the Earth, at this early point in the series, Krang was outperforming Shredder on the bad guy scale. On that topic, one thing that impressed me from a writing perspective was that while they're not the primary villains, Shredder, Karai, and the Foot Clan still have a presence during these issues. They don't hog the spotlight away from the main story, but we also don't go too long without seeing them. By the time we get to the Dimension X storyline, Karai has taken on a more proactive role in a very organic way. Make no mistake about it, there's an art to keeping all these characters and plot threads relevant to the larger story of the series. IDW's TMNT has proven itself to be a masterclass in how to keep all these proverbial plates spinning. In a few years, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise will be a whopping 40 years old. Whoa. The versatility on display in these 8 issues is a prime example of why people keep coming back to these characters. They can do far more than the general public will ever give them credit for. What this IDW comic book series does is expand on that potential and versatility in long form, in a way no other medium has frankly even come close to. And how fitting that we see it in the very medium the Turtles were born in, comic books.